Imagine spending your entire life building something so revolutionary that the rest of the world doesn't realise it until after you've gone. Imagine working in total obscurity while your ideas quietly become the foundation of modern mathematics, computer science, artificial intelligence and analytical philosophy. Today we're diving into the life of Gottlob Frege, the silent architect of modern logic, a man whose work was misunderstood, dismissed and even ridiculed, yet who ended up reshaping the entire structure of human reasoning. This episode will take you through his life, his tragedy, his breakthroughs, the paradox that destroyed him, and the legacy that outlived him. Let's begin. Frege didn't come from a world of fame or intellectual glamour. He was born in 1848 in the small northern German town of Wismar, not a place you'd expect to produce a foundational thinker. His father was a schoolmaster, his mother was a teacher, both deeply involved in language, structure and education. His father even wrote a textbook for children, teaching them how language works, its components, its structure, its logic. And that quiet influence would become the seed of one of humanity's greatest intellectual revolutions. Frege grew up surrounded by education, precision, order, but not greatness. Nothing in his childhood predicted what he would become. Yet one of his school teachers, Leo Sachi, recognised something special, a certain seriousness, a mind that needed more. So at 16, Frege began studying the foundations of language and reasoning without even realising it. His story was already in motion. At university, Frege didn't limit himself. He studied chemistry, maths, philosophy. But there was one figure who shaped everything. Ernst Abbe, a physicist, mathematician, inventor and visionary. Abbe became Frege's mentor. He guided him, challenged him, supported him, and even later helped secure him a teaching position. Frege got exposed to the central question: can mathematics be grounded in pure logic? This question became Frege's life mission, his obsession, his calling. He moved to Göttingen, the centre of mathematical brilliance at the time, and absorbed the ideas of some of the greatest minds in Europe. He earned his doctorate in 1873, and by 1874 he was back at Jena, starting what would become a slow, painful and lonely academic life. Frege wasn't charismatic. He wasn't a performer. He wasn't a social force like Russell or Wittgenstein. He was quiet, reserved, deep, obsessive. And he was about to drop a bomb on the world of logic. In 1879 he published Concept Script, a strange book, dense, technical, full of symbols and notations no one had ever seen. It was the first fully formed system of predicate logic, a leap beyond anything Aristotle, the Stoics, or even medieval logicians ever imagined. Before Frege, logic was like a toy, simple, limited, and rigid. But Frege introduced variables, quantifiers, so for all or for some, functions and arguments, expressions that broke through the limitations of ancient logic. This was the birth of modern logic, the logic that underpins mathematics, programming languages, AI systems and modern philosophy. Frege had solved what philosophers called the problem of multiple generality. He showed that language, thought and reasoning could be expressed with mathematical precision. It was revolutionary. But here's the tragedy. Almost nobody understood it. And those who did didn't really care. His masterpiece was ignored, not debated, not attacked, just invisible. He had invented the future, but the present wasn't ready. He believed something bold, that all mathematics can be reduced to pure logic. No intuition, no diagrams, no appeal to the mind's eye, just logic, clean, crisp and perfect. He spent decades building a logical foundation strong enough to derive arithmetic itself. In 1884 he published Foundations of Arithmetic and later Basic Laws of Arithmetic, his magnum opus. These works attempted something insane, to show that numbers, equations and mathematics were not abstract human inventions, but logical truths that could be derived step by step. This was his life's work, his identity, his contribution to humanity. Everything was going perfectly until one letter arrived, a single letter that destroyed everything. It was 1902 and Frege was preparing the second volume of Basic Laws of Arithmetic for publication, the final step in establishing logicism. And then a letter came from a young British philosopher named Bertrand Russell, respectful, polite, but devastating. Russell had discovered a contradiction at the heart of Frege's logical system. The paradox goes like this. Consider the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Does this set contain itself? If it does, then it shouldn't. If it doesn't, then it should. A contradiction. This problem, now called Russell's paradox, showed that Frege's foundational systems were inconsistent. Frege was shattered. Everything he'd built for decades was suddenly in question. When he received Russell's letter, he wrote one of the saddest lines in the history of philosophy. It is all the more serious that I have been unable to see any satisfactory solution. He added the appendix addressing the paradox, but privately, he gave up. His dream of logicism was over, and tragically, he believed he had failed. After Russell's paradox, a series of tragedies followed. His wife died, his children died young, his academic work remained misunderstood, his books sold barely at all. His mental state declined. In later years, Frege became increasingly bitter, isolated and politically extreme. He wrote angry commentaries about democracy, unions, foreigners, and especially Jews, writing the world now condemns. But these writings were unpublished during his life and irrelevant to the intellectual legacy. In 1918 he retired, lonely, unrecognised, broken. He died in 1925 at the age of 76, quietly, without fame, without glory, still believing his life work had failed. But history had something else in mind. He didn't disappear. His ideas were planted like seeds, invisible at first, but destined to erupt. The next generation of thinkers, Bertrand Russell, Wittgenstein and Rudolf Carnap, all studied him obsessively. Russell and Whitehead used Frege's ideas to build Principia Mathematica. Gödel used Frege's logic to prove his incompleteness theorems. Tarski built truth theory on Frege foundations. Computer science was created using Frege's predicate logic. And by the mid-20th century, Frege wasn't forgotten. He was recognised as the founder of modern logic, the father of analytical philosophy, the intellectual ancestor of AI, a pioneer of language theory, a visionary ahead of his time. His work in the philosophy of language, especially his distinction between sense and reference, transformed linguistics, semantics, and analytical philosophy. His legacy didn't just survive, it conquered. Frege's logic replaced Aristotle's logic after 2,000 years. It became the standard system taught worldwide. He didn't live to see his success, but the world eventually caught up. One of Frege's most powerful contributions wasn't mathematical at all, it was about meaning. In 1892 he published On Sense and Reference, arguing that a word has reference, the actual thing it points to, and it has sense, the way we think about that thing. For example, the morning star and the evening star. Different senses, same reference. Both refer to the planet Venus. This insight transformed linguistics, semantics, analytical philosophy, logic, computer science, cognitive science. Because Frege was one of the first thinkers to argue that a word only has meaning within the context of a full sentence, a view that became central to the philosophy of language. His work in this area is still taught today. And he died thinking he failed. But, as we've said, mathematics uses the Frege system, algorithms rely on it, programming languages, analytical philosophy, and they all owe him a debt. Frege is the ghost in the machine, the silent architect behind our digital world. Database logic, proof systems, semantic networks, search engines, and AI. He didn't live in the computer age, but the computer age lived inside him. And here's the lesson. Sometimes the world isn't ready for your ideas. Sometimes your impact isn't visible during your lifetime. Sometimes greatness isn't loud, dramatic, or celebrated. Sometimes it's quiet, precise, relentless. And sometimes the people who change history never get to see the world they change. And Frege proves something powerful. Your work can be misunderstood today and still transform the world tomorrow.